My name is Adrian Hole, and I have Servlarch Bend Lookout, a steel tower perched above 30 miles of unbroken forest. My job is simple: watch, report, and never assume a strange light is harmless. I've seen enough false alarms and close calls to know that the mountains rarely forgive complacency. But what I saw last night does not fall under any protocol I've ever been given. And I'm writing this because the more I replay it, the less I trust my memory. Still, the facts happened in one sequence, in one day, and I need to put them down exactly as they unfolded. The day started clean and uneventful. Sunrise came in soft orange bands across the valley. The air was cold enough to keep the haze low, and visibility was perfect. Exactly the kind of morning that makes this job feel almost peaceful. I checked my radio, logged barometric readings, swept the perimeter with binoculars, and walked the deck to test for loose bolts after last week's windstorm. Everything was ordinary, almost painfully so. 15 years on this tower has made me suspicious of ordinary days. They usually break in half by afternoon. At 10:17 a.m., I saw the first anomaly. Not a fire, not smoke, just movement, unnatural movement at the far ridge along the eastern tree line. My first assumption was a hiker off-trail, maybe someone cutting across the slope. But the figure didn't move like a hiker. It stopped too abruptly, stood too still, and more than anything, it faced the tower with the kind of directness that people at that distance never show. I radioed dispatch to report possible person in restricted zone. But as I said the words, the figure stepped back into the tree-line and vanished. No running, no turning, just gone. The way someone disappears behind a closing curtain. I kept watching for another 15 minutes, but nothing else moved. Probably a backcountry camper ignoring signage. Happens all the time. I logged it and forced myself to let it go. The next oddity came around noon, and this one I couldn't explain away so easily. A bright flash, like sunlight hitting glass, blinked from the valley floor. I checked my time, checked the angle, checked my lenses. There's no water down there this time of year. No loose metal. No cabins. No vehicles allowed. I leaned over the railing to trace the origin, and for a second, I felt something I hadn't felt at this job in years. A slow, rising unease. Because the flash didn't resemble a reflection anymore. It looked timed, deliberate, a single pulse, then nothing. The radio crackled at 12:22 p.m., but nobody spoke. It wasn't static. It was a soft, rhythmic distortion, like someone tapping the mic from very, very far away. I asked dispatch to repeat, but they said they hadn't contacted me. When I described the sound, they told me to run a function test on the handset. Everything checked out. Batteries full. No environmental interference. They logged it as a radio ghost, just a nickname for unexplained interference, but I've heard plenty of those. This wasn't interference. It was patterned. The day kept shifting little by little. The sky darkened even though there were no clouds forming. Shadows grew sharper on the forest floor. Even the birds quieted, which is never a good sign up here. Wildlife silence is like the forest holding its breath. You feel it in your ribs before you notice it in your ears. By early afternoon, wind funneled through the valley in thin, uneven bursts. I could hear it blowing through distant trees, but the air around my tower barely moved. I scanned again and again, hoping for something explainable. Storm fronts, hikers, wildlife. But the entire landscape seemed suspended, waiting. At 3:05 p.m., movement returned. Not on the far ridge this time. Closer, near the old service road leading to the base of my tower. Nobody uses that road, hasn't for a decade. But something was on it, just barely visible between the trees. A shape, maybe. A shift. Person. Couldn't be sure. I raised my binoculars, but the second the lenses caught the exact spot, the movement froze. I lowered them. Movement again. Lifted. Stillness. It happened 3 times. On the 4th, I stopped raising the binoculars. My stomach tightened in a way I couldn't justify. I radioed dispatch again, this time with genuine urgency. They told me a ranger unit was 60 minutes out and to stay inside the tower. That instruction shouldn't have bothered me. Protocol always favors caution. but I couldn't shake the thought that the figure from earlier had somehow closed the distance without crossing any open terrain. By 4 p.m., the air temperature dropped 7 degrees in less than 10 minutes. My breath fogged inside the tower. Another flash pulsed from the valley, brighter than before. And then something new happened, something I still can't frame in normal terms. A low vibration rolled through the steel of the tower, not from below, but from the direction of the ridge. It wasn't an earthquake. Felt more like a pressure wave. Something pushing the air in a steady, controlled rhythm. The forest stayed unnervingly still. Everything after 4:17 p.m. is where the day shifted from uneasy to truly wrong. I turned from the window for only a second, just long enough to check the radio again, and when I looked back, there was someone standing at the base of my tower. Not moving, not signaling, just standing there, looking up, and I hadn't heard a single footstep on the staircase. They stood perfectly still at the base of the tower, so still that, for a full 5 seconds, I genuinely thought I was looking at a trick of the light. The deck rail cast long shadows downward, cutting stripes across the ground, and the figure never shifted between them. Not an inch. Most people fidget when they stand still. They shift weight, scratch their arm, adjust their stance. Whoever this was didn't even sway. I forced myself to breathe slowly as I leaned over the railing, trying to get a clean look without exposing too much of my silhouette. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, maybe a jacket, maybe just heavy fabric. But what struck me hardest was that they weren't looking around. They weren't scanning for a way up. They were staring directly at me, and I felt that stare like something physical, something cold settling inside my ribs. I grabbed the radio. This is Holt at Larch Bend. I have an individual at the base, standing still. No ID on clothing. No response to signals. Dispatch responded a moment later. Copy. Ranger unit is approximately 38 minutes out. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. Their caution didn't comfort me. I tried calling down through the tower vent, raising my voice just enough to carry without sounding panicked. Hey, you okay? Do you need help? The figure didn't answer, didn't move. That silence did something to me. This wasn't the silence of someone confused or injured. Felt intentional, focused, like a silence that belonged to someone who wasn't alone in their thoughts. My pulse was punching through my neck. I tried again. You're in a restricted area. Rangers are on the way. If you need assistance, call out now. Still nothing. The tower creaked faintly in the cooling air, and I realized the temperature had dropped even further. My breath fogged as I exhaled. Indoors with the windows closed, I checked the thermometer. Another 3-degree drop in less than 15 minutes. That wasn't natural. Not with clear sky, not without wind. When I looked back down, the figure was gone. Not walking away, not turning around. Gone. My skin went electric. I stepped back from the railing instinctively, scanning the base, the service road, the tree line. There were no footprints in the dirt below. No motion in the brush. No sound of retreating steps. The only thing I heard was my own breathing, too loud inside the small room. Felt impossible. There is nowhere to disappear at the base of a tower without passing through open space. They would have had to sprint and I would have heard it, or they would have had to crawl under the deck. But even that would have made noise. Then the radio clicked. Not the call tone. Not static. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone lightly pressing the mic button in a pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I froze. Dispatch keyed in, their voice distorted slightly by distance. Holt, we're showing an open mic on your end. Can you confirm? I'm not transmitting, I said. Your channel's active. I'm telling you I'm not touching the radio. The tapping continued, steady, delicate, unmistakably intentional. Dispatch cut back in. Holt, please confirm your surroundings are secure. Before I could answer, something knocked against the metal ladder beneath the tower. A single clean clang, then another, then nothing. I backed away from the hatch door so fast my shoulder hit the map cabinet. Every instinct I've built in 15 years of solitary work screamed at once. Someone was definitely down there. Someone who had somehow approached the base, vanished, and then returned without leaving sound or shape. This time, I didn't try calling out. Whatever was beneath the tower already knew exactly where I was. I closed the hatch lock, flipped the deadbolt, and pulled the emergency flare from the wall case. Stupid, I know, because flares don't save you from people. But the weight in my hand helped. Made me feel like I wasn't completely helpless up here. Minutes passed. 10 maybe. Every one of them stretched thin. Nothing moved outside. No more knocks. No tapping on the radio. No figure at the base. The forest below looked frozen, as if the entire valley was holding tension. I stepped back to the window and scanned the base again. Clear. Empty. Then my radio crackled with a sound I wish I could write off as interference. It was my name. Not whispered. Not distorted. Just spoken, with the tone of someone saying it from the bottom of a long stairwell. Adrian. The voice wasn't familiar. It wasn't anyone on the ranger team. It wasn't dispatch. It came through the speaker like a single word caught in a wind tunnel, low but unmistakably human. I jerked away from the radio as if it had burned me. My throat clenched so hard I couldn't speak for several seconds. Dispatch chimed in again almost immediately, unaware. Holt, we didn't get that last. Did you call in? No, I managed. No, I heard. Someone just said my name. Copy. Ranger Unit 19 minutes out. Stay secured. I hated that phrase. Stay secured. It assumes the threat is on the outside. I paced the room, trying to think logically. Radios can pick up bleed over from nearby frequencies. Voices can echo in strange ways through canyons. Temperature drops can occur with evening inversion layers. People can wander into restricted zones. All of that is reasonable, explainable, but not altogether. Not the figure moving impossibly quietly. Not the vanish. Not the tapping, deliberate and coded. Not the voice saying my name through a closed channel. Something drifted through the air then. A faint vibration under my boots. Not shaking. Not movement. More like the subtle hum of pressure shifting. I checked the windows. No aircraft. No distant engines. No storm fronts. The hum grew for a moment, then faded, replaced by something worse. Breathing. Not mine. Not in the room. From below the floorboards. Slow. Even. Like someone standing directly beneath my feet, matching their breaths to mine. And then the first footstep touched the metal ladder. The first footstep on the ladder wasn't loud. It was almost delicate, the way someone might test a rung to judge if it would hold their weight. But in the absolute stillness of the tower, the soft metallic shift cut straight through my nerves. I gripped the flare tighter. My heartbeat climbed into my throat, and for a second, the only thought in my head was absurdly simple. There's no way someone made it up here without me hearing them approach. Another step, a careful, measured placement of weight. Someone was climbing slowly, intentionally, like they wanted me to hear every rung they touched. I backed toward the opposite wall, trying to angle myself where I could see the hatch door and both windows at once. The tower cabin is small, barely bigger than a single-room shed, and there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to retreat. Whatever was coming up that ladder would be on the other side of the hatch in seconds. I reached for the radio, but the second I touched it, the speaker crackled again. Not static. Not my name this time. Just a single, steady exhale. Long, controlled. Too close. I dropped the radio. The footstep paused. My breath hitched. Then another step. Higher. The rungs creaked with a rhythm that didn't match a normal climb. People rush. They climb fast or cautious, but there's variation. Shifts in weight, pauses, the scrape of clothes brushing metal. This was too even. Too precise. Step, wait, breathe. Step, wait, breathe. As if the climber was listening to my reactions and adjusting their pace in real time. At the sixth rung from the top, the breathing stopped. Everything went dead still. I counted the seconds in my head. 5, 10, 15. No movement. No breath. No sound from the forest below. A bead of sweat slid down my spine despite the cold. Then, with the quietest metallic click, the hatch lock shifted. Not turned. Not lifted, just tested. Light pressure from below. I stepped forward and braced my weight on it, pressing down as firmly as I could without revealing I was directly above it. My palms were damp. My hands shook against the metal. Another push. A little stronger. The lock held, thank God. But the person below didn't give up. They seemed to be measuring it, almost assessing it. I felt them shift their weight on the ladder, heard a faint scrape of boot sole, and then, knock, knuckle against steel. 3 taps, the same pattern I'd heard on the radio. My mouth went dry. Another 3 taps. Then silence. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even. Whoever's down there, Rangers are arriving any minute. If you need assistance, say something now. For the first time since this began, I wished they wouldn't respond. Silence felt safer than whatever voice had spoken my name earlier. I waited. Nothing. No voice. No tapping. Not even the creak of the ladder. I repositioned myself, inching toward the window to see if anything moved below. The slope was empty, the road empty, the surrounding trees unmoving. The whole world looked like a photograph. Perfectly still, perfectly quiet. Wrong. The ranger unit should have been close by now. I glanced at my watch. 5:12 p.m. They were late. Even accounting for rough roads, they should have been in radio range by now. I picked up the handset. Dispatch, this is Holt. Any update on Ranger ETA? I expected the usual calm voice on the line. Instead, the radio returned only a low-frequency hum, thick, vibrating the speaker grill. Not like interference. More like a voice trying to push through. The hum rose, deepened, then flattened. Something about it triggered the same instinct you get when standing too close to a large generator. Your chest tightens, your bones feel the vibration more than your ears hear it. I set the radio down carefully. Then something else changed. The temperature sank again. Fast enough I saw the fog of my breath thicken with each exhale. The hair on my arms lifted. My ears popped. Pressure was shifting inside the tower, from the top down, like air being pulled through a narrow vent somewhere above me. I looked up. The ceiling vent, an old, square metal panel used for heat release, was vibrating. Not rattling from wind. Moving. A slow, circular tremor, like air pushing against it from the outside. The outside, 38 feet above the ground. There's no platform up there. No ladder. No way for something or someone to be above that vent. A soft creak bent the metal. My breath froze. Another creak. The screws shifted 0.5 millimeter, as if someone were testing that, too. For one horrifying moment, I had 2 things happening at once. Pressure on the vent overhead, and the absence of any sound from the hatch below. The person who was on the ladder wasn't on the ladder anymore. I edged backward, keeping my eyes on the ceiling, flare still in hand. My throat tightened with every small vibration traveling through the cabin walls. At 5:19 p.m., my radio clicked. And this time, God help me, it was the Ranger unit. Larch Bend, this is Unit Bravo. We're 15 out. You copy. I nearly collapsed from the relief. I grabbed the radio, but before I could respond, another sound layered beneath their voice. Faint, breathy undertone. The same controlled exhale I'd heard earlier. The Ranger didn't seem to notice it. I did. It was inside the cabin. I turned slowly toward the hatch. The lock had shifted. Not open. Shifted. As if someone had lifted it just enough to test how much resistance I was applying. I backed toward the farthest corner, every muscle taut, every thought reduced to a single repeating truth. Whatever was out there, it wasn't trying to break in. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. And at 5:21 p.m., the hatch lifted 1 inch. Just one. Just enough to let the cold rise. The hatch lifted only an inch, just a small, careful tilt, but that was enough to let a thin blade of cold air slide up into the cabin. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Every instinct I had screamed at me to slam my weight onto the panel and lock it down, but something about the way it had risen, so controlled, so deliberate, made me freeze in place. This wasn't someone forcing their way inside. It felt like someone testing the space between us. Testing me. The flare felt useless in my hand now. A tool meant for open wilderness, not for a threat that moved like it understood structural weaknesses. My fingers tightened around it anyway. The hatch stayed still for several long seconds. Then, with the softest metallic sigh, it lowered back down. Gently, not falling, not dropping, lowered, as if the person beneath the tower no longer needed to see whether I'd react. That somehow terrified me more. My radio jolted with another transmission from the ranger unit. "Holt, this is Bravo. 12 minutes out. If you copy, activate your beacon so we can get eyes on your location." I reached toward the beacon switch on the wall, hand shaking. Before I touched it, a pressure shift rippled across the cabin, like the entire tower inhaled. The ceiling vent trembled again, just a tiny vibration, but enough to make me stop. If I turned on that beacon, it would flood the tower with high-frequency LEDs. Bright, sudden, attention-grabbing. And right now, I didn't know whether that would help me or draw something closer. I hovered my hand above the switch, wavering. My breath sounded too loud in my skull. Then the hatch moved again. Not up, sideways. A slow scrape, metal sliding against metal, as if fingertips were tracing the perimeter. A deliberate outline. One full circle. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the window frame. I finally forced myself to speak. "Whoever you are, Rangers are almost here. If you don't want trouble, stay where you are." A single, quiet breath rose from beneath the hatch. Not a reply, not a threat, just the sound of someone listening. I couldn't take my eyes off that thin line of metal, expecting it to lift at any second. But then something happened outside that broke my focus. Movement. In the treeline. I turned sharply toward the north window. Between the trunks, just beyond the old service road, a shape shifted. Not a person, not an animal. Something too large to be either yet too narrow to identify. It didn't walk. It didn't lean. It just readjusted, as if settling into a clearer view of the tower. I stepped closer to the glass, trying to get a better angle. My heartbeat thudded in my throat. And then, as I stared into the shadows between the trees, a chill moved through me. A second shape slid into view beside the first. Then a third. Not rushing, not emerging, revealing. They stood far apart, spaced evenly like markers, all facing my direction. I blinked, and for a moment they seemed to blend back into the darkness. Perfectly still silhouettes. Human height, human width. But the way they held their posture was wrong. Too rigid, too controlled. No sway of balance. No natural curve of stance. The radio hissed again. "Holt, if you can hear us, we need that beacon active." My jaw clenched. I went to hit the switch. The moment my fingers touched it, a low creak echoed from the ceiling vent, sharp enough that I snatched my hand back. The screws along the frame twitched. Something was directly on the roof. The forest stayed unervingly silent. The shapes in the treeline didn't move. The hatch below didn't lift again. It was like the entire world around my tower was waiting for me to make a choice. I swallowed hard and forced my fingers toward the beacon switch again. This time I pressed it. The tower lights flared on. Bright, white beams exploded outward, cutting through the valley like a signal flare. The interior strobed once before stabilizing. My eyes watered at the sudden illumination. And outside, the shapes vanished. Not ducked, not ran, gone, as if the light erased them. But the momentary relief vanished when I felt the vibration beneath my boots. The hatch shuddered once, sharply. Then again, harder. Whatever was underneath did not like the light. "Holt, we see the beacon, hold tight." The ranger's voice finally cut through, clearer now. 7 minutes out. 7 minutes. I just had to stay alive for 7 minutes. That number felt enormous. The hatch jolted again, harder this time. The lock rattled. Dust drifted down from the frame. My throat closed. I grabbed the emergency extinguisher and wedged myself above the hatch. If it broke through, I'd have one chance to stun them long enough to escape to the roof. Not a smart plan, not a safe one, but the tower only gives you so many options. The breathing beneath the door grew louder. Deep, aching breaths. as if the person beneath had been holding their lungs empty for far too long. My radio crackled with Bravo's voice. Closer now, but the distortion was creeping in again. Halt! If here, 5. Then a second sound layered over their transmission. A whisper, right behind me, not from the hatch, not from the vent, from the center of the room. Don't! I spun so fast the extinguisher slipped. There was nothing there. No figure. No shadow. Just the empty cabin. But the whisper hadn't been imagined. Carried weight. Position. It had come from a mouth that should have been inches behind my shoulder. My pulse hammered like it was trying to break through my ribs. I clutched the extinguisher again, backing toward the south window. A sudden clang exploded through the cabin, the hatch throwing itself upward an inch before slamming shut again. Then, a footstep on the roof. Slow, deliberate, measured. Something had climbed the tower from the outside, and now it was directly above me. The footstep above me was so clear, so heavy, that the ceiling vent rang with a faint metallic tremor. I staggered backward instinctively, extinguisher raised, eyes locked on the trembling square of metal. The idea that someone or something had climbed the exterior ladder without making a sound was impossible. Absolutely impossible. The steel framework amplifies every movement. Even raccoons sound like intruders up here. But this was deliberate, controlled, like the climber was placing each step with unnatural precision. Another footstep, slow, pressing directly over the center of the room. My breath fogged in the cold air. The tower was never this cold at dusk. My thermometer, now sitting on the desk behind me, read 28 degrees. It had been 48 an hour ago. A 20-degree drop without wind, clouds, or weather shift does not happen in a valley like this. The radio crackled again. Halt! This is Bravo. For minutes we're... The rest swallowed itself in static. Not typical static. This was thick, layered static that felt almost directional, as if the interference were moving with the thing on the roof. A faint scrape brushed across the metal overhead, like fingertips dragging along the steel paneling in a slow, deliberate curve. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering out a frantic rhythm. Not one part of my training had prepared me for this. Not because it wasn't in the manuals, but because the manuals assume your threats follow physical laws. The ceiling vent bowed inward just slightly as weight settled directly above it. I raised the extinguisher. Stupid weapon or not, it was all I had. Get off my roof. My voice cracked but still carried. Rangers are almost here. If you need help, answer me. Silence. Not even breathing. But the pressure stayed. A weight pressing so steadily against the vent that the metal screws creaked under strain. Then, a single exhale drifted down from above. Not forceful, not aggressive, just a long, slow release of breath, like someone letting out air while watching me. I stepped to the far side of the cabin, putting the desk between myself and the center of the room. Every instinct screeched at me to get outside, to climb down the exterior, get away from anything overhead. But the idea of stepping onto the deck, exposed, surrounded by forest shadows, felt worse. The hatch beneath me rattled again. 2 hits. Hard. Something was below me. For the first time in 15 years in this tower, I genuinely felt trapped. Another footstep on the roof. Then another. Slow pacing from one end of the cabin to the other. Testing weight distribution. Mapping my movements. I didn't want to believe that. I didn't want to think of something analyzing the structural weak points, but its footsteps matched mine. Whenever I shifted left, it shifted right. When I stepped back, it approached. It was listening for movement through the steel. The radio exploded with a sudden burst of clarity. Halt! If you can hear me, stay away from windows and central vents. Repeat, stay. Static tore the rest apart, but the warning hit me like a punch. Stay away from vents? Windows? Did they know something was happening? Had someone else reported similar activity? Dispatch never mentioned odd calls today. The thought didn't comfort me. The pacing on the roof stopped. Then I heard the faint metallic grate of screws turning slowly. The vent was being twisted from the outside. That snapped something in me. I dashed toward the emergency fire axe mounted near the door. The extinguisher clanged against the floor. As my fingers closed around the axe handle, the tower structure groaned under a sudden downward force. The vent bent, not cracked, not ripped, bent, bowing downward by nearly an inch. I gripped the axe so tightly my knuckles numbed. "Back, OFF!" I shouted, swinging the axe upward toward the corner of the vent. The metal boomed with the impact. A dent formed, but the pressure didn't ease. Something exhaled above me again. Too close. A whisper followed, indistinct at first. A murmur through the metal. A voice pressed through the barrier in a tone too low to decipher. I froze, straining to hear. The second whisper was clearer. "Down." That single word rattled through the tower like a cold draft. Was it telling me to go downstairs? Or was it saying it was coming down? I backed up fast, stumbling into the desk, nearly knocking over the lantern. My breathing was so loud I almost didn't hear the sound that came next. Footsteps on the stairs below the tower. Not the ladder. The stairs. The service stairs that hadn't been used in a decade. With steps so rotted they should have collapsed under a person's weight. And yet, someone was ascending from the ground level toward the deck. My scalp pulled tight. Something was above me. Something was below me. And they moved with the same unnatural rhythm, as if synced. I forced myself to look out the south-facing window. Every tree in the valley was still. No wind, no movement, no ranger vehicles, just the growing dusk. Step closer. The sound was nearly at the deck now. My radio sputtered again, and this time Bravo's voice broke through in full, frantic clarity. "Halt! Do not open the door. Stay away from." Static swallowed the rest, high-pitched and violent. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. A shadow fell across the deck. The roof went silent. The hatch went silent. Everything went silent. Then, something tapped on the cabin door. Not pounding, not trying to break in. Just a single, gentle knock, as if asking permission. The knock was so soft, so polite, that it hollowed out something in my chest. A gentle tap on a steel door at sunset shouldn't have felt worse than the footsteps on the roof or the hatch lifting beneath me. But it did. There was an intention in that knock. A request. A question. As if whoever or whatever stood on the other side didn't need to break in. It just needed me to respond. I pressed myself against the far wall, keeping the axe raised. My breath came shallow and uneven. Every instinct screamed not to go near that door, not to give any indication I was listening. Another knock. Same rhythm. Same softness. The radio clicked. "Halt! Don't! Door!" Bravo's voice cut through in shards, like someone dragging words through broken wires. "Don't let... Contact... Arriving." Static swallowed the rest, but the message was clear. "Do not open the door." A thin line of cold seeped across the floor near the threshold, almost too faint to see, like frost spreading in slow motion. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but it continued creeping, thin, branching patterns spidering out from under the door frame. My palms went cold against the axe handle. The tower creaked overhead. The thing on the roof shifted its stance. Slow weight redistribution, nothing more. It wasn't pacing anymore. It was simply waiting. The hatch beneath me stayed silent now too. Also waiting. 3 points of pressure around the tower. Coordinated. Calculated. Waiting for me to make the wrong move. The door handle twitched. Just once. A faint metallic tap as if someone nudged it with a finger. I tightened my grip on the axe until my knuckles ached. "Rangers are almost here," I said, my voice thick and uneven. "If you need assistance, step back now." The response wasn't a voice. It was breathing, right on the other side of the door. Slow, human, measured. Breath that knew it was being heard. The frost on the floor thickened. I backed toward the center of the room, forcing my mind to focus on something practical, like barricading the door. The table was too light. The storage cabinets were bolted down. The bed frame might work, but dragging it would make too much noise. Noise suddenly felt dangerous, Another knock, this time a little firmer. Still polite. Still controlled. I swallowed so hard it clicked in my ears. The radio cut through again, sharp and urgent. Halt. Sound siren if you can hear US. Yes. The emergency siren. Mounted on the exterior wall. High-frequency alarm meant to alert hikers in case of fire. It wasn't meant for threats like this, but maybe the noise would. The ceiling vent bowed again. And above me, something whispered through the metal. No. That single word chilled every inch of my spine. The voice didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed, as if it understood what I was thinking and was reminding me that it didn't want that. I backed away until I hit the desk again. My breath fogged in thick plumes, turning the room into a cold haze. Another knock on the door, this time followed by an almost imperceptible shift of weight. The shadow at the bottom of the frame changed shape slightly. Whoever was standing there had moved their stance closer. I raised the axe. My arms trembled. "Stay back," I said. "Stay back." The breathing at the door stopped. Then, a quiet voice, soft enough that it barely crossed the threshold, whispered, "Adrian." My knees almost gave out. Hearing my name earlier through the radio was bad enough. But hearing it whispered through the door, by a voice that couldn't possibly know who I was, that broke something inside me. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, you're not coming in." Silence. Then a second voice. Higher, strangled, like someone trying to speak through water. Echoed the first word. "No." My throat locked. A third voice followed. Same tone, same cadence. "No." Layered, echoing, mimicking, the same way the radio interference had. The same way the tapping pattern had. The thing or things outside weren't just here instinctively. They were learning, adjusting, reflecting back what they heard. The frost on the floor reached my boots. I stepped back fast, lifting my foot as the cold pricked through the leather. The door handle twitched again, harder this time. A deliberate test. The radio screeched with a sudden burst, and Bravo's voice finally blasted through, loud and clear. "Halt! We're on the ridge. Do not open that door. We see your beacon. Hold position." I scrambled for the radio. "They're here. They're here." The door handle stopped moving. The breathing stopped. The frost slowed. The pressure above me went still. Whatever was on the roof froze. Felt like the entire tower held its breath. Then, the thing on the roof moved. Not slowly this time. Not with that careful, deliberate control. It ran. 3 heavy steps, fast enough to rattle the beams, then a booming impact as it jumped toward the deck rail. The tower shook with the weight hitting the exterior. My heart slammed against my ribs. I ran to the window in time to see a dark blur drop past the edge of the glass. Too fast to make out shape, too controlled to be a fall. It hit the ground without a cry, without injury, without hesitation. And it wasn't alone. 3 shapes stood at the treeline again, now closer, now clearly visible as silhouettes outlined by the beacon glow. All facing the tower, all still as stone. Behind them, something crawled out from under the deck. Too long, too thin, moving with joints that didn't bend the way they should. It rose slowly to stand among the others. The shapes all turned their heads toward the ridge. The Rangers' headlights were finally cutting through the trees. The shapes began to move, not toward the tower, toward the incoming Rangers. The beams from the Ranger trucks split through the trees in harsh white columns, finally cutting across the service road like a lifeline. I'd waited for that sight for what felt like hours. Relief should have flooded me. Didn't, because the shapes, those rigid silhouettes that had been watching my tower, had already turned toward the lights. And they were moving, not sprinting, not charging, moving in a way that made my skin crawl. Smooth, gliding strides like each step was placed without needing momentum. They drifted more than they walked, slipping between trees with unnatural precision. The Ranger truck slowed. Headlights panned across the ridge. I could almost hear the engine idling from inside the tower. They were close, so close. "Bravo, they're coming toward you," I shouted into the radio, my voice cracking from the strain. 3 no for individuals. Unknown. Moving fast along the slope. Static. Then a clipped reply. Copy visual closing. The rest dissolved into a hiss so violent it buzzed through my teeth. I slammed the radio against my palm, desperate to get a clearer signal. But the interference just grew louder. Pulsing. Rhythmic. A sound like someone breathing through thick cloth, layered over itself hundreds of times. Outside, the shapes didn't break stride. They approached the ranger lights without changing pace, without any hesitation that a normal person would have confronting headlights, noise, and armed officers. The tallest silhouette reached the edge of the beam first. It stopped. The beam cut across its front, outlining a body shape so wrong my brain refused to process it at first. Too long in the limbs, too narrow in the torso, the neck angled at a degree no human neck could maintain. And the head turned toward the truck with a smooth, gliding tilt, no muscle shift, no shoulder movement, just a pivot like a camera mounted on a silent gimbal. The ranger's voice finally burst through the radio. Sharp, startled, alarmed. Contact. Contact. Stand. The headlights swerved. The truck jerked left. A loud metallic bang echoed across the valley as something slammed into the passenger side. My stomach dropped. A second silhouette moved into the light, closer now, and the features blurred, not because of distance, but because the surface of its skin seemed to absorb the beam instead of reflecting it, like it was swallowing the light. Then the forest lit up with a flare from the rangers, a harsh red bloom. For the first time, I saw one clearly, a humanoid shape, human-sized, but the face, if it had ever been a face, was stretched smooth, like wax melted and reformed. No eyes, no mouth, no features, just an uncanny, blank surface that caught the red flare and reflected nothing back. I staggered away from the window, my lungs locking. The radio screeched with overlapping voices. Back! Back! Don't hold! Metal clanged, truck doors slamming open. Footsteps pounding. A shout cut short. Another impact. The flare light flickered through the trees, bouncing off the steel tower frame in blood-red flashes. I forced myself back to the window, gripping the sill to keep my hands steady. One ranger was running, silhouette darting between trees, firing a flare pistol back toward the slope. The flare arced and crashed into the brush, lighting up a 10-yard radius. In that red glow, something moved on all fours, too fast, too fluid, its limbs bending in ways joints shouldn't. It lunged. The ranger screamed, and then the radio died entirely. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was suffocating. From the treeline below my tower, a crackle of movement rose. Leaves shifting, branches bending under weight. Not panicked movement, coordinated, approaching. I backed away from the window so quickly my calf hit the desk. The entire cabin felt smaller now, shrinking inward, every escaping breath turning the air colder. Then, footsteps on the stairs again. Not hurried, not struggling, climbing, returning. My chest tightened so hard I could only take shallow sips of air. I moved to the opposite side of the room, axe trembling in my fist. The first shadow slid across the deck through the window, a tall, rigid silhouette stepping into the glow of the beacon. It paused directly in front of the cabin door, head angled upward toward me. Then a second shape joined it. Then a third. They arranged themselves in a line, evenly spaced, as if waiting for some signal. Silent, unmoving. The forest behind them was empty now. No ranger lights, no engine, no voices, just those three figures, watching the tower. Then, a fourth shape stepped up from beneath the deck. It must have crawled up the supports. I hadn't heard a sound. It rose to full height, slightly shorter than the others, and stood beside them. For shapes, for still silhouettes, facing the tower. The beacon flickered once, twice. Then the bulb dimmed, pulse fading in and out like a dying heartbeat. The figures reacted immediately. Their heads turned simultaneously toward the failing light, then toward each other, then slowly back toward me. The dimming beacon cast their bodies in a rhythmic shadow, and for the first time I saw their movements clearly. They weren't breathing, not even the subtle rise and fall of the chest. No breath, no sway, no micro-adjustments of living bodies. Just stillness, absolute stillness. The beacon flickered again, longer this time. The shapes stepped closer. All four, in perfect unison. One step, pause. Another, pause. Their feet made no sound on the deck. I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the cabin wall. I held the axe like a child holds a toy weapon, more comfort than defense. The figures reached the door. Then they stopped, all at once, and all four turned their heads upward, staring directly at the window where I stood. Their necks bent too far, too smoothly, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. The beacon flickered one final time, then went out. Darkness swallowed the valley, and in that sudden blackout, I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of metal shifting, the cabin door handle turning. The moment the door handle began to turn in the dark, my whole body locked. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The only sound was that slow metallic rotate, too steady, too controlled, like whoever was turning it didn't need to hurry, didn't need force, didn't need fear. They already knew I had nowhere to go. The beacon outside stayed dead. The valley was pure black now, the kind of black where shapes dissolve and distances blur. My eyes strained in the dim cabin light, trying to catch any hint of movement near the door, but all I could see was the silhouette of the handle, slowly, steadily, lifting. I backed along the wall, the axe slick in my hands. My footsteps felt thunderously loud against the cold floor, even though I tried to stay silent. My breath came out in visible clouds that drifted like smoke in front of me. The handle reached its peak rotation, stopped. A long moment of terrible, deliberate stillness followed, as if whatever stood outside was waiting for something. Waiting for me, waiting for a shift in the air, a sound, a crack in my resolve. Then, the handle released, quietly, gently, as if letting me know the door could open whenever it wanted. A soft scrape passed across the deck outside, one figure shifting its stance. Then another. I could hear them, even without the beacon. Faint movements, controlled weight transfers. No breathing, no talking, just the quiet scrape of something that understands how people move, but doesn't perfectly mimic the small, unconscious parts. My radio clicked again, startling me so violently I nearly dropped the axe. A burst of static snapped through the cabin, followed by a voice. Rough, strained, fragmented. HLT, whole. If, here, stay tower, stay in light. If, light? What light? A low vibration crawled along the cabin floor, making the boards tremble beneath my boots. The hatch under me pulsed once with a hollow clang, like something down there had struck the underside with an open palm, not trying to break it open, reminding me it was still there, still waiting. A breath of wind suddenly rose outside, a single gust sweeping across the valley. It carried the distinct, unmistakable scent of smoke. My heart jumped into my throat. Fire? Now? But the smoke smelled wrong. Not burning wood, not brush, acrid, cold, like scorched metal. I moved to the window, the one farthest from the door, and peered cautiously into the dark. Through the pitch black, I made out faint traces of motion. Not the figures, something else, something lower to the ground, slithering through the brush with a smooth, rolling gait. My throat tightened as the shape crested into the open for a second, just long enough to reflect a glint of distant starlight. It wasn't crawling, it was flowing, like it had too many joints or none at all. Then it disappeared beneath the tower. The hatch vibrated sharply. I stumbled back, choking on adrenaline. Something was directly beneath the center of the room, pressing upward with a slow, rhythmic pulse. It felt like a heartbeat, except far too strong, too even, and definitely not mine. The radio screeched again, this time with a clear, desperate voice. Halt! Do not let them in the dark. Move to. Static swallowed the rest. Not random static. Directed static. As if something were leaning close to the transmitter and drowning out the message. The door handle twitched sharply. Then again, like the thing outside had grown impatient. I raised the axe higher. Stay back, I shouted. I'm armed, and backup is coming. My voice shook badly. It didn't sound like authority. It sounded like a man trying not to break apart. For the first time, one of the silhouettes outside responded. Not with words, not with movement, with a low, resonant hum. It started quiet, like the vibration of a distant engine, then deepened, spreading across the deck and up the tower frame. I felt the railing shiver through the steel. The door handle rattled under the vibration. The hum grew, deeper, louder, thick enough that my ears ached, thick enough that it resonated in my ribcage. I dropped to a crouch instinctively, covering one ear, the axe clattering gently against the floor. Then, a second hum joined it, and a third, and a fourth, all at different pitches, layering, merging, harmonizing. No natural creature makes a sound like that. No machine hums like that. This was a chord built from throats that shouldn't be able to create tones that precise. My stomach lurched. My teeth vibrated. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. A silence so sharp it felt like a physical snap. I stayed crouched, barely breathing, watching the door, watching the floor, listening for anything. Then footsteps on the roof. Again. They were lighter this time, faster, like something excited. The ceiling vent shuddered violently, once, twice, before bowing inward with a dent so deep the screws snapped at one corner. Dust rained down from above. I scrambled away, slipping against the floor, heart smashing against my chest. A hand, pale, long-fingered, pushed through the bent opening. Not a whole arm, just the hand, testing the air, feeling the space, exploring. The fingers curled, and the moment they did, the door handle jerked violently, turning all the way down. They were coming in. Not patiently anymore, not politely. They wanted inside the tower. I lunged for the light panel on the wall. Not the beacon. The internal flood switch, a pair of industrial halogens that blasted the cabin with harsh white light for nighttime operations. I slammed my palm against it. The halogens burst to life, flooding the interior with blinding brightness. Instantly, the hand at the ceiling snapped back. The figures at the door stopped moving. The tower went still again. Their reaction was immediate and unmistakable. They did not like the light. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had leverage. But only inside. Outside was still pitch black. And the Rangers, God help them, were still somewhere out there in the dark. The halogens burned so bright the air itself seemed to shrink away from them. The cabin glowed white-hot. Shadows erased to the edges like they were afraid to linger. My eyes watered at the sudden glare, but I didn't dare blink too long. The moment the light came on, everything outside had stopped. The hand at the ceiling vent withdrew instantly, jerking out of view like it had brushed fire instead of air. I heard a scramble on the roof, fast, uneven steps skittering backward across steel, but not in any pattern that matched human footwork. The silhouettes at the door froze mid-turn of the handle. Not slowly, not naturally. They simply went still like mannequins caught in a shutter flash. For the first time that night, I felt a shift inside me. Not safety, not confidence, but leverage. A razor-thin advantage. Whatever they were, they'd been fearless in the dark. Coordinated, patient, testing every weak point. But the moment the light hit them, they reacted like it was a boundary they couldn't cross. I clung to that. The radio hissed, sputtered, then came alive with fractured words. Alt, see the flicker, stay in light. Then silence again, swallowed sharply, as if something pressed a palm over the transmitter. I didn't bother replying. They knew I was alive. They knew I was in here, and they knew I'd figured out something that mattered. The halogens hummed above me, warm enough to nudge the cabin temperature up a few degrees. My breath no longer fogged quite as thickly, but the floor beneath me was still cold, unnaturally cold, and that terrified me more because the source wasn't gone. It was waiting, testing, repositioning. A faint scrape echoed from under the tower, soft, curving, like a long limb dragging along the support beams. I raised the axe again, turning slowly in a circle, trying to track the sound. Every instinct told me the moment any light failed, the things outside would move again, and fast. The ceiling vent thumped once. A startled, frustrated sound. Then a longer scrape, metal against metal, as if something were circling the vent, looking for a weak point that wasn't exposed to direct light. The door handle turned again. Just once. A test. But this time, the thing that grabbed it didn't commit. It only shook the handle gently, curiously, before letting it fall still, the metal clicking faintly in the bright room. The light was working, but I had no idea how long the halogens would last. The wiring wasn't new. The bulbs were the kind that blow without warning when they overheat. And the tower had dropped more than 20 degrees in less than an hour earlier. Temperature shifts aren't kind to old circuits. I forced my shaking hands to steady. Think, Adrian. Think practically. Think like a lookout. The halogens depended on the tower's auxiliary battery system. The system had a backup failsafe, a breaker beneath the desk. If the power surged or dipped, the whole thing would trip automatically. If these things outside could manipulate temperature, pressure, even radio interference, could they affect power? A faint vibration rolled along the roof, spreading cautiously toward the far ridge of the cabin. Not pacing this time, probing, staying clear of the cone of light beneath the vent, staying in the blind spots. Stay in the light. That was the last clear thing the rangers said. My pulse hammered. A new sound rose outside, a whisper of shifting leaves. Not wind, movement, coordinated movement. The silhouettes at the door hadn't left. They'd repositioned, spread out, forming a semicircle along the deck. I couldn't see them clearly through the glare on the windows, but their shadows, long, thin, warped, stretched across the steel grating. They were surrounding the tower, waiting for the light to fail, and then something else happened. The radio sparked to life again, but this time the voice wasn't distant or broken. It was close, too close. Alt. My skin crawled. Halt. Not the Rangers. Not dispatch. It was the voice that had whispered outside the door earlier, the one that had said my name like it already owned it. I stepped back, gripping the axe with both hands. Help. Help. It was trying to say help, but not like a plea, like a rehearsal, like it was practicing the shape of the word in its throat. Then quietly, let us in. The halogens flickered, just once, a quick blink. The shadows outside twitched, jerking forward almost imperceptibly before freezing again when the light steadied. My stomach fell down through the floor. I backed to the exact center of the cabin, where the light was brightest. The axe handle was slick with sweat. My heartbeat drowned out the quiet. Another flicker, longer this time. The silhouettes outside leaned inward, as if pulled by invisible strings. The halogens steadied again, but dimmer. Not much, just a hint, a warning. Then a scraping sound beneath the floorboards, pushing upward, as if something were pressing its full weight into the bottom of the cabin, trying to shift the light above it. The boards flexed slightly under my boots. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The ceiling vent rattled violently 3 4 times, each strike harder than the last. Dust rained down. A screw popped loose and clattered to the floor. Something outside mirrored the pattern, hitting the deck support with a matching rhythm. Then another shape hit the tower frame with the same beat. 3 points, 3 strikes, perfectly in sync. The halogens flickered again twice. The entire valley seemed to inhale. I braced for the lights to die. Instead, a blinding white burst erupted from the ridge. Headlights, more than one pair. 3 ranger trucks tore into the clearing, engines roaring, flood lamps blazing across the trees like miniature suns. The beams hit the tower, slicing across every angle. The silhouettes scattered instantly, vanishing into the trees with grotesque, bending strides. One dropped from the roof in a blur, crawling into the brush on too many limbs. Another flattened itself against the ground, blending into shadow like ink dissolving in water. The pressure under the floor released. The vent stopped rattling. Everything outside moved in one direction, away from the approaching lights. A ranger's voice boomed through a megaphone. Keep the lights on. Hold position. Do not come out of the tower. I collapsed to my knees so hard the axe slipped from my hands. The halogens steadied. Flood lamps washed the cabin in safety. Backup had arrived. But even as I pulled in ragged breaths, my eyes drifted toward the treeline, where the last of the silhouettes slipped into the dark like smoke being pulled by a silent wind. They hadn't fled. They'd retreated. And before disappearing fully, the final shape paused, just long enough for its blank, featureless head to tilt upward toward the tower. Not angry, not defeated, just patient, as if telling me, this isn't over. You survived the light, but night always comes again.